Okay, let's unpack this. We're all kind of used to the idea of a ghost town, right? Places that are ruined by, I don't know, a gold rush bust or a big fire.
Or a dam project, something that physically removes it from the map.
Exactly. But this deep dive, based on the sources we've been looking at, it tells a story that's actually far more unsettling. And it's because of what didn't happen. This is a town that was abandoned, but there was no fire, no flood, and definitely no war.
What got me right from the start in the source material was just the sheer quietness of it all. It wasn't a catastrophe. It felt more like a scheduled vanishing.
A scheduled vanishing, I like that.
Yeah, there was no panic, no chaos, no sirens in the streets. I mean, the sources paint this picture of domestic life just frozen in time. Houses are locked up, all neat, cars are parked properly in the driveways.
And that detail that really sticks with you.
The meals. Meals left unfinished on kitchen tables.
That one visual, I think one report mentioned, a half-carved roast chicken, 3 wine glasses out. It just suggests a life interrupted mid-sentence. So our mission here then, it isn't really to solve a missing persons case. It's to unpack these sources and figure out why an entire, completely unremarkable town could just vanish almost overnight without a single official explanation. And more importantly, we need to understand what that silence, that very deliberate silence, really implies.
The silence isn't a lack of information. In this case, the silence is the information.
It
points to coordination, to intent.
Okay, so let's set the stage. Because the sources, they really go to great lengths to establish just how normal this town was. Before all this happened, it was, by every possible measure, painfully ordinary.
Wonderfully ordinary, even.
Yeah.
The epitome of boring stability.
Right.
And that's key. The documents we reviewed, they emphasize this complete normalcy, I think, to just get rid of all the obvious theories right away. We're talking about a small, stable population. The census data, it showed almost flat growth for something like 40 years.
So no big population boom, no sudden exodus.
None. It had steady jobs, local manufacturing, some small-scale agriculture. Property prices were totally stable, no speculative bubbles, no sudden crashes.
So it's basically an economic and regulatory non-event.
Exactly. The crime rates were negligible. No history of any major industrial disaster. And the sources stressed this part. Nothing secret, nothing experimental. This wasn't a hidden military base or some nuclear test site.
It was just a community.
Just a community that had a post office, a single elementary school, a local hardware store. And that foundation of normalcy, it's so crucial because it makes the abandonment feel like a bizarre choice, not something inevitable. We can't blame the economy, we can't blame geology, not outright.
But then that perfectly stable picture, it starts to fracture. And the really strange part is that the warnings, they didn't come from the news or any official channels. It was neighbors. Neighbors just noticing a pattern.
It was a realization that just sort of crept up on the town, not a shockwave. The source material details how the first signs were. Well, they were completely mundane. Houses going dark at night, blinds staying closed for days.
Mailboxes overflowing.
Right. Started with one family, then maybe another one across the street, and then before you know it, an entire block is just empty.
And the way they left was profoundly odd. I mean, these weren't typical moves.
No.
There were no for sale signs stuck in the lawns, no huge removal vans blocking the streets. It felt more like a retreat than a relocation.
And the only communication seemed to be these vague, almost standardized answers given to the few people who actually asked. We have accounts of people saying things like, oh, work's moved, or family stuff, or the most non-committal one of all, it's just time.
Wait, that uniformity, that's highly suspicious. If 100 families move for their own reasons, you'd get 100 different detailed stories.
Of course.
But if everyone is giving the same non-answer, what does that tell you?
It suggests an unstated agreement, a social contract of silence. The sources hint that this was, a pre-agreed narrative. A script designed not just to explain why they were leaving, but to shut down any further questions.
So it wasn't a conversation.
No, it was a termination of the discussion. They weren't explaining their reasons. They were covering the tracks of whoever made the decision.
Which, naturally, brings us to the official response, or the complete lack of one. When the few people left finally reached out, the contradiction between what was happening and what authorities were saying was, well, it's infuriating to read about.
The official line was a complete denial of reality, a massive one. When local councils, regional planners, even the utility companies were contacted, the response was always the same stonewalling. We have nothing to report.
No evacuation orders.
Never. No public health alerts, no safety concerns announced, nothing. Officially, according to the government files that were reviewed, the town was operating completely within normal parameters.
But practically, it was being switched off piece by piece. And this paradox, this is the real mystery here. The government is saying nothing is wrong, but the actual infrastructure that keeps a town alive is being systematically dismantled.
Think about it. If nothing was wrong, why did the garbage collection just stop? The sources show residents first reported missed pickups, and then poof, within 3 weeks the service was gone completely.
And the school buses.
Stopped running. It forced the few remaining families to drive their kids 40 miles to the next district. And maybe most telling of all, the postal routes were quietly shortened and then just abolished. You had to drive to the next town over just to get your mail.
That points to an intentional, calculated phase-out. It wasn't a crisis response. It was a planned administrative collapse.
It was surgical. I mean, the gas and power wasn't just shut off in a blackout. The utility providers, they quietly scaled back maintenance, and then, one by one, they disconnected the supply lines at the edge of the town.
At the perimeter.
Yes. The source material puts it perfectly. Officially, everything was fine, but practically, the community was being switched off. They completely avoided a press conference, but they pulled every single plug needed to make living there impossible.
Which makes that official silence feel even louder somehow. Why go through all that bureaucratic trouble, the quiet decommissioning, instead of just issuing an evacuation notice?
Because an evacuation notice is a public record. It needs a reason, a stated reason. And that reason automatically creates a paper trail, which opens up a world of legal liability. And that's where we pivot from the what to the why.
Okay, let's go there. Let's talk about what finally leaked out years later. And we have to be clear, this didn't come from government archives. It came from former residents who spoke very, very carefully to independent researchers.
Right, not on the record, not publicly.
So what did they describe?
Well, they didn't describe a single definitive disaster. There was no big explosion, no sweeping illness. Their accounts all focused on this pervasive feeling of pressure, of being watched. They talked about patterns.
Patterns that were intrusive, unsettling. They mentioned unusual inspections, but not from the local council in their marked cars.
No, from strangers. Strangers in dark, unmarked SUVs. They also talked about whole sections of the town suddenly being restricted, sometimes with a temporary fencing that just appeared overnight, or these aggressive security patrols.
And this is where the specific details add so much. Several residents, people who'd lived there for decades, they mentioned strange smells at night.
Yes. Some described a sharp metallic smell. Others said it was more like a faint sulfurous scent, almost like ozone.
There were sounds, too.
Muffled, persistent, low-frequency sounds. They said it didn't feel like construction. It felt deeper, like subterranean work. It paints a picture, not of disaster, but of monitoring, maybe contamination, or even some kind of secret mitigation effort happening under the cover of darkness.
So if they weren't physically forced out at gunpoint, how do you get hundreds of people to just leave their lives behind without a single public protest? How is that achieved?
That is the ultimate strategic move, the sources point to. The mechanism wasn't force. It wasn't explicit threats. It was quiet implication.
Implication.
Residents described being pulled aside by people they trusted. You know, a local business owner, maybe a longtime city employee who'd been briefed. And they were told, off the record, that staying in town was simply not recommended.
A direct order creates a paper trail, a lawsuit, a need for compensation, but not recommended. That's a whisper. That's a rumor that makes you sell your house for cheap.
Precisely. The sources observe that implication is often way more effective than a direct order because of the deniability it provides. If an authority issues a written order to evacuate, they're accepting responsibility for whatever the cause is.
And the financial fallout.
But if they just create enough vague, unsettling conditions, the smells, the closed roads, the services stopping, the resident feels like they made the choice. They chose to move for family reasons. They weren't forced.
This brings us right to the core of it, then. The analytical truth that the sources have dug up. The real answer to why. Why this massive, coordinated effort of silence?
It all comes down to liability, to avoiding financial consequences. If an authority had admitted the real reason, and let's just speculate for a second, based on those reports, maybe it was an unmanaged environmental hazard, or a deep geological instability.
Or some kind of contamination.
Right. Admitting any of that would immediately trigger huge responsibility.
You're talking millions in compensation for every single home, years of cleanup costs, federal investigations, and, critically, the creation of official records.
And those records, the public health reports, the environmental impact statements, the minutes from town meetings, that paper trail can't be erased.
So by staying completely silent,
They avoided every single one of those consequences. The town wasn't officially destroyed. It wasn't officially failed by the government. It was just allowed to fade. No announcement was needed because they made sure no legal or financial blame could ever be pinned on them. They traded transparency for liability protection.
that's a staggering strategy. It implies that the long-term cost of being honest, of investigating and compensating the entire town, was far greater than the cost of just letting it die quietly.
It also tells us something about the nature of the risk itself. To justify this level of sustained, systematic deception, the underlying problem couldn't have been simple or cheap to fix. It suggests something deep, something systemic, that required permanent abandonment, but that the authorities just could not afford to put on the public record.
Let's talk about the town now, its current state. Because that visual just adds one final unsettling layer to this whole story of silence. The source material describes it today. The buildings are still standing.
Perfectly whole. The furniture is still inside. Curtains are still hanging in the windows. Paint just slowly peeling.
It's the lack of decay that's so disturbing, isn't it?
It is. Nature hasn't really reclaimed it yet. It doesn't feel like a ruin from 50 years ago. It feels like it was vacated last week. It's paused. That's the word the reports use. Paused. The doors are locked, not because the buildings are unsafe, but because someone shut them and expects them to stay shut.
A life stopped mid-sentence.
That's the legacy of the silence.
So, to circle back to our mission for this deep dive, what's the key takeaway here? For someone trying to understand this very specific kind of calculated abandonment.
I think the ultimate lesson is that we're all conditioned to believe abandonment needs a big, visible catastrophe. A nuclear event, a war, something you can see. But this town, it proves that sometimes places are emptied not because something terrible happened, but because something terrifying might happen.
And the risk of that future event was just deemed too much to manage publicly.
Exactly. And when the people in charge calculate that explaining the risk, documenting it, is actually more dangerous and more expensive than just staying silent, well, the silence stops being a mystery you need to solve.
The silence becomes the confirmation.
It becomes the confirmation. It confirms the danger is real, it's permanent, and it's something they believe is best managed by just letting the memory of the town itself fade away, rather than risking the creation of an official record.
That is a chilling conclusion, and it really does tie together the three paradoxes we found. Perfectly normal town, the quiet, coordinated departure, and the deafening, calculated silence from officials. I think understanding that mechanism, that strategic use of silence to avoid liability, is the key insight from this deep dive.
Which leaves one final provocative thought for you, the listener, to take away. Think about the physical state of that town. Buildings standing, furnished, just paused. What kind of catastrophic unspoken threat, whether it's geological, environmental, or maybe something else entirely, what would be so profound that authorities would consciously choose this kind of permanent, indefinite silence over facing the known, expensive consequences of an open, transparent explanation? What kind of potential disaster is best managed by simply letting a place and its story disappear from the official narrative?